Hi, I'm Marcy Marcusa, and this is Manitoba. It's a podcast, and it's a place that, well, is not known for its wealth. In fact, our province, Manitoba, is considered one of Canada's have-nots. Not super flattering, right? But it's how you're actually described if you are a province that gets equalization payments from Ottawa. You probably don't stay up at night reading about equalization pay. So what is that? Well, it is a tool that's used by the federal government to balance the scale between the provinces so that wherever you live, you can expect comparable public services. The equation that decides how much you get is controversial, but it's based on the province's ability to bring in money from taxes and natural resource revenue. So it's probably not surprising to anyone that resource-rich British Columbia and Alberta are among the haves. But Saskatchewan? Well, not too long ago, our sister Prairie Province, Saskatchewan, was actually considered a have-not. But Sask was able to wean itself off payments about a decade ago because they doubled down on their natural resources, oil, but also potash. So could Manitoba do the same thing? Well, the Premier thinks so.
One that we're almost certainly going to do, a second that we're trying to put the financing piece together, and then the third, which has been very public, is the Port of Churchill. And if we build the three of those out to the full extent, then yeah, I think Manitoba can become a have province, and not like, 40 years in the future. I mean, like within the next 5-10 years kind of thing.
That's Wab Kinew speaking to podcaster and former Liberal advisor David Hurley at an event in Toronto last month. And what the Premier said there is the focus of today's podcast. What do we know about these projects, and what could they mean for Manitoba? Now, let's be honest here. Weaning the province off of equalization payments is a big undertaking. Just over 19% of Manitoba's budget comes from those payments. So that's nearly $1 in every $5 that our government spends in this province. But Kinew says these three mega projects that his government is working on could make it doable. Because altogether, they're projected to bring in a combined $30 billion of economic activity. The CBC's Bartley Kives has been looking into the Premier's comments. And we're going to hear from him. He begins by telling us that while one of these projects is familiar, the other two are more of a mystery.
One of them, he says, is the expansion of the Port of Churchill, which is something that he's been talking about and has requested funding from the federal government and perhaps the private sector. And that involves a lot of different components. And that's, of course, been out in the public sphere, as he mentioned. And the two others he doesn't get into. Now, keep in mind, Kinew is speaking to an audience in Toronto on stage with this podcaster, but he's also speaking to a national audience. If he was speaking to reporters locally, he probably wouldn't be making these general statements. So we don't know what these other two projects are, but the Premier did say they are energy projects. Here's what he had to say to reporters on Monday when asked about his claim on Saturday.
Well, there's going to be hopefully $30 billion worth of economic activity we bring to the province, maybe more if we get all these projects we're looking at lined up. And they are in the energy space, but when we're ready to roll things out, we'll make sure that you all are the first to know.
The first to know. I'm sure we will be.
I hope we're not the first to know, but I hope we're second. What do we know about the Churchill plan then? Because remember the Prime Minister's famous line before the Grey Cup, and then people were making jokes, when's the Grey Cup? But it's coming up. So what do we know about the Churchill plan?
More about it. Yeah, I mean, this plan involves an upgrading of the rail line, the Hudson Bay Railway, an expansion of the port, the potential for an energy corridor. A second component that would extend energy up into Nunavut. An expansion of the port in and of itself is, let's just say, leave the energy corridor aside. Leave away the bells and whistles and get to the basic idea of an increased ability to ship goods through the Hudson Bay and also take in goods with a closer route to Europe. Always the original idea about Churchill. The hydrogeography of Hudson Bay is not an easy thing. I mean, there's one of the major national mega projects that has been approved is at Kitimat, BC. It's at the end of a long fjord, effectively, a very long bay. It's protected from the ocean. It is it has shipping year round. There's no ice there, and even when ships get out of that long bay, there's a ring of islands that protects the west coast of BC from the open Pacific Ocean, protecting. I'm using it in air quotes here, but it's very shallow in Hudson Bay. Dredging would be required. They might have to build a new port infrastructure off the coast of Hudson Bay into the water with an artificial island of some sort.
So you're not just in open water.
You're not just like it's there are beluga whales going by. There are a lot of them, shipping and hits with cetaceans, whales, animals in the whale species. There are a lot of practical concerns that make it not so easy. People will say, "Oh, Russia's got shipping. Shipping through Murmansk up into their Arctic. That too is at the end of a very long fjord. It's not just exposed to the ocean. It's not that easy, no matter what they do. And if they choose another area of the coast, they have protected areas planned for the west coast of Hudson Bay, and then further east is Wapusk National Park. There isn't an easy place to put a port in Hudson Bay or in and around Churchill.
And also then if the goods move, of course, the land and the rail lines, the stability to carry that kind of weight. Just for clarity for Manitobans, because they are hearing from the Prime Minister and now we're hearing from the Premier, and is this project in Churchill confirmed to go ahead?
No. And there's a lot of different components, and it lacks the clarity. When I asked folks from Chris Avery from Arctic Gateway, okay, what else needs to be done? And there's discussions, more planning. Effectively, there needs to be some private investment. Kinew has hinted that investment may have to come from Northern First Nations, but we're talking about billions and billions and billions, billions and billions and billions built a liquid natural gas terminal at Kitimat, BC. It would take billions, potentially even more, to do this. A lot of money has to be sourced up, and it's got to actually it has to actually make sense to the private sector. Otherwise, they're not going to be part of it.
What do the PCs then have to say about this, Bartley?
Well, I told Abi Khan, the PC leader, what Kinew had said on the podcast, and here's what he had to say about it.
It's another big flashy announcement by their premier with absolutely no backing, no dates, no timelines, no plan. Just another flashy announcement.
And I want to mention here, an additional $30 billion in economic activity. That's about 42% of Manitoba's existing $71 billion GDP, gross domestic product. That would be a lot. So Kinew had said that this is going to turn Manitoba into a have province within 5 to 10 years if this all happens, as opposed to by 2040, which was the pledge he made in September, without any real kind of discussion about how Manitoba would get there. Manitoba would need a lot more revenue, period. Taxation revenue primarily, in order to become a have province and wean itself off federal transfer payments. To see that happen in 5 to 10 years, that would transformative things would have to happen. So I say to myself, what are the many other mega projects, the two that could possibly happen to generate that? And I mean, I'm not going to speculate. I'm not going to play the game of speculating on air what these projects may be. I say something, people will think that's what they're actually doing.
But they have to be something that's going to bring in a significant amount of revenue if we're looking at all three of these in totality.
And it's not clear about if spending billions on a new hydro dam or energy storage or something else is going to be enough, because you spend money to make a little bit money, but Manitoba needs energy for the sake of energy. Hydro is no longer this golden goose that lays financial eggs for the province. Hydro is going to require a net influx of revenue to pay for all the infrastructure repairs that are needed and the additional generating capacity. Hydro is no longer this ATM that Manitobans can withdraw from anymore, and it's taking a lot of time for governments and perhaps citizens to realize that. Hydro needs a lot of cash. It just doesn't spit things out. Energy doesn't come for free.
Thank you for coming in.
You're more than welcome.
So we're going to have to wait in Manitoba to find out the details of all these other projects that Wab Kinew has planned. The Premier does say we're going to learn more at his State of the Province address, though, in December. Meantime, we do know that the federal government and the province are working together to make the Port of Churchill Plus project a reality. With on-again, off-again tariffs from the United States, Canada is under pressure to make itself a more attractive trade option for other partners. And while speaking to reporters in Latvia this summer, the Prime Minister said the Northern Manitoba port could make that happen by opening up new opportunities for the country.
It unlocks, as you just said, LNG. It unlocks, and I salute Premier Kinew's initiative here, it unlocks major Indigenous leadership and participation. It potentially unlocks pathways for critical minerals and links into Europe. So it has an element And I'll finish with this point, because I know I need to finish. What are one of the elements that get projects up to the level of national interest? Diversification. Diversification across provinces, diversification of market, diversification of new activities that we haven't been doing at scale, because all of those elements are going to make the country stronger, make us more resilient, make us more prosperous across all of Canada. Thank you.
Okay, part of what Carney is commenting on there is that the Port of Churchill Plus project is unique. The port and the railway, you might know if you live in Manitoba, but let's revisit the details. It's owned by the Arctic Gateway Group. That's a partnership of 29 First Nations and 12 northern communities in Manitoba and Nunavut. But those practical challenges that Bartley was talking about earlier mean that even the biggest proponents of the plan agree that they don't have easy problems to solve to move forward with all of this. Feiyue Wang is a professor and Canada Research Chair over at the University of Manitoba's Department of Environment and Geography. He also directs the Churchill Marine Observatory that's right near the port there. He says as a researcher, he's not surprised that Churchill has captured Ottawa's attention because, yes, an expansion will bring unprecedented social, economic, and industrial opportunities. But he also told my colleague Faith Fundal that the challenges are enormous.
Many of us would say finally that the attention is now rightfully paid to the Port of Churchill. So definitely there's a lot of potential and excitement. But in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of concerns and challenges. And the question is how? How do we do this properly?
Right, because every year about 57,000 beluga whales migrate to the area. What's your sense of what increased shipping traffic might mean for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first coming to mind is the potential impact on the marine ecosystem with beluga whales on top of everyone's mind. There's a very large number of beluga whales migrating in that area. So shipping, of course, anytime we have increase in shipping activities, there are all kinds of potential impacts on them. For example, you may have direct collision of ships with beluga whales, and you also have this ship noise, underwater noise that could affect their migration patterns. And of course, with shipping itself, the ship itself could bring in invasive species that could change the marine ecosystem. And with black carbon emitted from the ship itself, it could have other impacts. And the last but not least, whenever you have shipping, there's always the risk of oil spills. So if you have an oil spill in a northern environment, especially in cold water and sometimes with ice present or nearby, the question is what are the impacts of those oil spills to the marine ecosystem and what can we do about it?
And part of that marine ecosystem, of course, includes polar bears. Churchill is known for its polar bears. But what could this kind of development mean for polar bear populations, for example?
Yeah, I'm not a polar bear expert myself, but of course I've been collaborating, working with a lot of my colleagues who have the expertise in that area. Polar bear, as we all know, that the polar bear population in Churchill it's already been challenged by climate change. So whether there's a shipping or not, the future of polar bear-based ecotourism is in jeopardy.
We know that the shipping season in Churchill has historically been about 3 months or so. You mentioned climate change. What are you noticing about how much longer the season is getting?
Yeah, we're right in the middle of doing a major shipping season study from Port of Churchill throughout Hudson Bay. And the recent past has telling us that the open water season has increased on average per day every year since at least 1980. So we're talking about 30 to 40 days longer now compared to early 1980s. When you mentioned the current shipping season is about 3.5 months, that is largely based on the historical sea ice conditions. With the climate change, we know the ice has been becoming thinner, and the ice formation started later in the season, and melting started earlier in the season. So the models that we've been using definitely tells us the open water season will continue to expand. And so at this time, we have not completed our study just yet, but all different climate scenarios all point to the same direction. That is, the bay will become more navigable and for longer throughout the year. And in probably by 2100, the bay will become more or less navigable all year round.
That sounds like there are pretty big economic impacts. Is that part of your study? Is that something you're looking at as well?
Yeah, absolutely. Our study has always been co-developed with Inuit and Indigenous communities in Western Hudson Bay area, as well as in Churchill and Northern Manitoba. And one of the topics that are probably less discussed is climate change. In some cases, it does open up new opportunities for those communities in terms of their own socioeconomic development and accessibility. So many of those regions, many of the communities in these regions are among the most remote in terms of accessibility to commodities, to resupplies. So it does provide that opportunity. So that's why I think you will see there will be welcoming signs from some communities. But the question is, how do we do this properly, especially given that we'll talk about development in indigenous land, we'll talk about development in sensitive northern and Arctic ecosystems. So really the question is how? How do we do this properly, not only economically viable, but also culturally sensitive and environmentally sustainable?
Well, that is it for this week's episode of This is Manitoba, hosted by me, Marcy Marcusa. If you happen to be a new listener and you're not already following us, please open the podcast app of your choice and do that now. And why don't you take a moment to tell your friends and neighbors about us too? Thanks for doing that. Thanks for listening. We'll be back with a new episode next week.